worked to create a calendar of events regarding the election. So we really start with Election Day and move all the way to December 29th. What the calendar will reflect is the most notable or noteworthy things. It's not every single thing that happened, but sort of milestones, if you will. If I could ask Ms. Kennedy to bring up so we can kind of follow it along. This has a copy, digital and paper copy has been provided to the clerk of courts. So anybody watching along online, anybody here will have access to this very document later today. It's not privileged or anything like that. I just didn't get it completed, unfortunately, until this morning and transmitted to Ms. Kennedy and her staff. So, and really this is designed because there's been a lot of misinformation that has been relayed publicly. There have been a number of media outlets that are writing, suggesting, and asking what Pinal knew and when we knew it, specifically with respect to the undercount that occurred. There has been information that we knew before the canvass was ever presented to this board. I will start by saying that's categorically false, and I'm going to kind of step through and walk through the process for you. Obviously, if you have questions, if something doesn't make sense, interrupt me, ask me. I do have Jerry here, our elections director. I may ask Ms. Roll to step up to assist if there's an answer that I don't know. Obviously, Chris may pop in as well because this is certainly a team effort. So we're going to begin with Election Day. Election Day was Tuesday the 8th. By Wednesday the 9th, we had day of count completed. So remember the process, all the people come in on the 8th, they're filing, and they stayed through the night. It was really about 4 o'clock in the morning that those day of non-provisional ballots were completed. After that, they started doing the early ballots that were dropped off on Friday, Saturday, or Monday. So that continued for a number of days. Once those were completed, early the 14th, I believe, the 15th, somewhere in, the 16th, it's already up there. Then we started the provisional ballots. Again, so we can just real rough numbers talk about these. There were about 109,000 early ballots in total. There were about 35,000, give or take, day of ballots, and a couple thousand, a little less than 2,000 provisional ballots. Again, those are really general numbers, but that's sort of the numbers that we're looking at. So the early vote count is completed on the 16th. The 17th, we were able to complete the provisional vote count, and then our numbers were then transmitted to this board. The information came, I believe, late. I think it was like 4:55, if memory serves me, that it was transmitted to this board. We had a pre-scheduled meeting to canvass the results on Monday, November 21st. We came in here. There was a meeting. This same sort of agenda item occurred. It was about a 24-minute meeting. I did review it this morning just to make sure we're all on the same page. The board canvassed the results. And again, the canvassing of the results isn't the blessing of the results or anything along those lines. It's, hey, this is what was transmitted to us. This is official. We're now transmitting it to the Secretary of State's office so election challenges can begin. Another important thing happened at that point. On the 21st, the incoming elections director, Ms. Roll, who's present, who's now the elections director, began her preparations for the recount. We knew at that point that a recount was highly, highly likely based on the numbers that had been reported publicly. We believe it was going to be at least 2. So there was a recount that we anticipated. So we began doing preparation, and it looks like there's. Supervisor Goodman, do you have a question?
Yes. Thank you. I just want to go back to the statement that you made earlier about the canvassing aspect of it, because some of the allegations and accusations that are made towards this board is that we knew of certain things and took place. And I would like you to really emphasize more what the canvassing process is, what that does, and what we did as a board.
Yes. So on the 17th, the elections department completed their count. Every provisional, every early, every day of ballot that they believe they had was tabulated. That's really what the canvass is. It's that tabulation. It was transmitted to this board. I believe it was transmitted actually to your clerk, Ms. Kennedy, for your review on the 21st. When you came in on the 21st, what you were saying is, hey, this is exactly what was given to us. There's no ability for you to modify those votes. There's no ability for you to erase votes, to add votes, to do anything. You had what's called a ministerial duty. Ministerial duty is there's no discretion. The language is actually shall in the statute. I believe it's It's Title 16. It's in the 600s, but it is you shall canvass the results. You shall not change any information. Looks like Chris is bringing the actual statute to me. Is it 661?
Nope, missed it by a few.
646. There we go. Shall be entered in the official record. Election district shall show the number of ballots, shall show the number of ballots rejected, titles, the number of votes by precincts, county received. That's what the canvass is. It is a statutory document. That is what allows election challenges to occur. So if you recall, I believe aspiring Attorney General Hamada filed a suit before the canvass, and the court actually dismissed it and said, hey, it's not ripe yet. The canvass must occur before we can actually even consider this. So the canvass is really that, this is how I described it before, and I think it's accurate. It's that line in the sand saying, okay, now our results are official. If you remember, we had a member of the public who came up, and she was very frustrated, saying, why are people conceding? These numbers aren't even official. You know, we're just assuming what the media is reporting is fair and accurate. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, she's right. It's not until that canvass occurs. That's when it's official. That's when we know what the actual votes are. And that is what election challenges are based on. I do want to step back, though, because there is something that you brought up, Supervisor Goodman, I think is absolutely important that needs to be addressed. And that is, we did have a board meeting on the 16th. If you recall, there was a member from the public, I don't know if he's here, I believe his name was Mr. Riley. Very honest man, very good man, who essentially came forward and said, hey, you know, county attorney, recorder's office, elections director, you're saying everything went perfect. Things didn't go perfect. There were a couple issues, and he specifically talked about when he ran his ID through the poll pad, his name did not populate. And he's like, did I get erased as a voter? Was I eliminated? Like, that's a real issue that we should look into. We agreed with him. It was an issue that we should look into. And essentially, he was not erased because there was a mechanism in place where if you showed up, you ran your ID through that little scanner, and your ID didn't populate or said you weren't a registered voter. One, we had paper roster, and we could look at the paper roster for all registered voters. And if you weren't on the paper roster or the people didn't use the paper roster, they could call the recorder's office, and the recorder could, in fact, validate that they were a actual voter. In this case, there were a handful, actually more than a handful, there were 60-some people specifically who went, scanned their IDs. They did not populate, but they were able to cast a vote. We were able to either find them in the paper rosters or there. So we knew when he brought that forward to our attention before you canvassed that there was some discrepancy in what our poll pad numbers were reporting and what our actual vote count was. We did know that. But we believed it was just that difference in people whose IDs didn't scan. And we knew that those people were still being given the opportunity to vote. So we did not believe it impacted the vote totals whatsoever. It only impacted the numbers that the poll pad was reporting. That is the only inconsistency that we were aware of at that time when we presented this information to you on the 21st and you canvassed. Now, fast forward to the 28th. On the 28th, Ms. Roll met with Mr. O'Reilly. And again, Mr. O'Reilly, I apologize for using your name, but you're the guy that really helped us. And quite frankly, he was instrumental in helping us. He met with us. We brought the vendor in. We looked at all the poll numbers. We looked at the EMS numbers. We looked at the votes cast number. And on the 28th, we discovered, I think this is more than just poll pad numbers. That's really the first time Pinal County said, uh-oh, something is not quite right. And that was Ms. Roll and her team that were looking in it, preparing for the recount. They continued to look for the next couple of days to say, hey, is this just a typographical error? Is this something that's there? By the 30th, Ms. Roll was convinced that there was an issue, and that's when she brought it to my attention. I can tell you she called me at 3:05. We spoke for 21 minutes and 44 seconds on November 30th, and that's when we discussed it, and then we all came to the elections department on, and if I can go to the next page, December 1st. Thursday, December 1st. Oh, that's the same one. It was on December 1st. And I know that's really tough to read. I can't read it either, so I have my own kind of notes here. On December 1st, the decision was made to actually open the boxes because this is what we discovered on the 28th. People at the polls had told us there were 600 people that came in and checked in to vote. But that's not the number of ballots that we were finding in the boxes. And there's an issue with that. If a voter gets out of bed, gets dressed, goes into public, goes to a polling place, stands in line, gets a ballot, gets handed to them, they walk over, they go into a booth, the likelihood that they just at the last second decide that they are not going to cast that vote is very, very, very small. So when we see the number of people that checked in and the number of pieces of paper that are in there not matching up, it became very concerning to us. And what we did is we compared that to the actual machine, what the machine told us, ballots that were ran through. And again, they were not matching up. At this point, there's a chain of custody issue because there's a recount that we know is forthcoming, so we were very careful about what we did next, but we made the decision collectively that we have to find out how many ballots are actually in that box because something's not right. Either the machine's wrong, the person's wrong, there's something that is not accurate. So the elections department on December 1st actually opens the boxes. We brought ES&S, who is our vendor, in, brought them in. We actually opened the boxes, and we began to rerun some of these precincts. We had identified initially 4 precincts that had a fairly large discrepancy. If it was 1, maybe 2 people off, maybe that was just somebody counted right. They just didn't make enough tick marks. There could have been a lot of reasons, but we had one, for example, had 90. There was a difference of 90. That was enough to say, hey, so we ran those 4 different precincts. And we discovered that the numbers that we reported the first night were not identical to the numbers that we were running through now. That's when we initiated a much more in-depth investigation. We wanted to then figure out the scope of this issue. So on Friday, we started to sample the late early ballots because at this point we had only found and identified this being day of ballots. There were no early ballots that we had looked at or anything else. So we decided, hey, we need to figure out the scope of how large this is. So on December 2nd, we started sampling early ballots. There were no inconsistencies detected. That following Monday, so that's Friday the 2nd, that following Monday, there is a court hearing. And in that court hearing, which we were a party to, an order was made. And that is so small because it quotes the order verbatim, and that's what I'm going to read to you today. So effective December 5th, and this is subsection F, Apache, Cochise, Coconino, Gila, Graham, Greenlee, La Paz, Maricopa, Mojave, Navajo, Pima, Pinal, Santa Cruz, Yavapai, and Yuma counties, that's all 15 of us, shall not release to the public the results of the recount, including daily vote totals, until the court has certified the results. Subsection G, all participants to the recount keep confidential any information they may acquire that would disclose the vote of any elector and destroy any notes that would disclose the same. So what happens is on December 5th, right in the midst of us discovering this, we were put under a court order that we cannot publicly disclose this information to anybody. The very next day, December 6th, the Secretary of State's office comes and they certify our machines. We needed to have our machines recertified again because at this point we don't know, is this an issue with machines? Is this an issue with people? Is this an issue with software? The Secretary of State's office comes in, all 3 of our machines pass the logic and accuracy test with ES&S, our vendor, being present, and our recount officially begins. Once we start running those numbers, we intentionally front-loaded those suspect precincts where we knew the numbers weren't quite right. We front-loaded that to run those first. It was on Wednesday, December 7th, in the late afternoon, that we made a call to the Secretary of State's office identifying them that, hey, we've got discrepancies. It does not appear that our numbers are going to match up. At this point, we don't know how large it is. We don't know, is it 200 votes? Is it 10,000 votes? We just know that at this point, it does not appear that they're going to match up. So we continue the recount because we needed to know the final discrepancy.
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'd like to interrupt. Just when you say we called, who actually made the call to the Secretary of State? Do you know?
I know I was on the phone call. I believe Ms. Roll was on the phone call. I believe Mr. Keller was on the phone call. I know I was at ACO and I was in a parking lot, so I was on my phone outside the presence of everybody. I think there were some people, I believe those 3. I believe the state elections director was on the call. I believe their outside counsel was on the call. And if memory serves me, I believe there was one other party on the call. I don't remember who that was.
Okay.
And again, that would have been afternoon to late afternoon, somewhere in that time frame. I could get the exact time. So we continue doing our recount. On Friday, the 9th, that is when Mr. Hamada files his election contest in Mojave County. On the 12th, our recount is continuing. Hamada files his petition to inspect ballots. We continue recounting until the 16th. The 16th, we have our preliminary full recount completed. However, after seeing the discrepancy there compared to our initial canvass, we asked the elections director, at this time it's Ms. Roll, to look at things and to say, hey, are you confident in these numbers? Ms. Roll is not entirely confident that those numbers were going to be accurate, so the decision was made, let's run it a third time. Our only concern, I should clarify, is only the day of election ballots. So on the 16th, the decision was made by our elections director, you know what, we're going to run all those day of ballots again. There's only 35,000. We can run them again. We need to make darn sure whatever our numbers are correct that we give to the Secretary of State's office on the 22nd. So the 16th, the 17th, through the weekend, it wasn't until the 20th that the full recount occurred. I apologize. It was on the 20th, the Secretary of State's office files the motion for a recount. Remember, we had until the 22nd to get our numbers in. We did have a conversation with the Secretary of State's office. We told them we thought we would be able to get those in by the 22nd. We would be able to get them in the morning of the 22nd, meeting their deadline. The Secretary of State's office on the 20th chose to file a motion to continue to say, hey, we don't want you to be rushed getting the answers right, or more important than getting them in quickly. So a motion was filed by the Secretary of State's office and their counsel to push out to December 29th, that number. We continued to do the recount. On the 21st, Ms. Roll authored a 4-page discrepancy report. I'm going to ask her to step up once I'm done here, and she's going to kind of talk about it, because we've done the investigation. We know where the mistakes are. We know where the errors occurred, and she's going to kind of go through those with you as soon as I'm done. On the 22nd in the morning, we did disclose our full recount numbers that included the third recount of day of election ballots to the Secretary of State's office. On Friday, the 23rd, there is a evidentiary hearing in Mojave County regarding Hamada's lawsuit. At that time, the lawsuit was dismissed. Please note we are still under this other court order that we cannot discuss the updates, the counts, or anything along those lines. The Christmas holiday goes through. The 27th, the 28th, the 29th comes, which is when the court scheduled that hearing. On December 29th, the court...
Mr. Chairman, may I interject a question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, we were prohibited from disclosing the counts, but we were not prohibited from disclosing errors.
I believe that would be an overly technical. That is not the intention of the court's order. The court's order mirrors statute. The statute is we are not allowed to publicly discuss what's going on. That it is a cone of silence would be a very kind of generic term for it. So that is not, you don't say, well, technically that's what it said, but we're going to go ahead and do this. It is very clear. The intent is when you read the entirety of the order, it's a 5-page order, it is absolute radio silence. You don't discuss anything. In fact, the Secretary of State's office was not even willing to confirm with us or to discuss with us if we were consistent with everybody else in our mistakes. Now, again, realize that our county's in recent history, our county has not been involved in a recount. The state hasn't done a statewide recount ever, 20-plus years. The recounts have always been in congressional races or smaller races, not a statewide recount. So we knew that we were off, but we didn't know the magnitude that we were off. We didn't have a frame of reference. When we reached out to Secretary of State's office, they couldn't, under the court's order, their interpretation, they said, we can't even let you know what other counties are. We can't even let you know if you're in the ballpark, if you're way worse or way less. It is an absolute radio silence. So I would disagree with the assertion that we were allowed to say, hey, we've got errors, and to make that public. That would have been in violation of the court's order.
So the fact that Mr. Kavanaugh felt obligated to ask that, perhaps we weren't instructed enough that we was total. So just in the future. So, okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We did ask that publicly to Chris Keller in a previous meeting, and we got advice that I recall was contradictory to what Mr. Volkmer just said. Go ahead.
All right. Mr. Goodman.
And I disagree with both of you, because we've had meetings with Mr. Volkmer, and in those discussions we were told that, and from what I feel, is that this is not to be discussed at any point or level. Now, I didn't ask those specific questions that you're asking right now, and maybe that's our fault for not asking those specifically, but I walked out of those meetings thinking that this is absolute, not open until the right time to put this out there. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
And if I may, I want to concur with Supervisor Goodman. I was like, this is sealed. This is no discussion, is how I interpreted the instructions from our county attorney's office.
Okay.
Just want to put that out there.
And I, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
and I would concur with Supervisor Miller and Goodman.
Thank you. Wait.
But to your point, because of that, because you just heard it right here, the discrepancy between the five of us, I think going forward with some of these issues and things that happen, and hopefully they don't, hopefully we can get this crap together, because all it does is it creates more distrust and everything else to the public, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to be open and transparent in this. And so that's the part of, the very fact that Supervisor Kavanaugh just asked the question, a point of certain things. I'm not sure why anybody doesn't call and verify with our county attorney what that should be. I think even before any information's even expressed out there, we should be going to our county attorney, that's what he is, and asking, so what does this exactly say? And I do not remember, and I would like to see those minutes, if you can find those minutes to what Supervisor Kavanaugh, because that's not the impression I got either. But I'd like to see that.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to move forward. I believe at this point, we provide on Thursday, December 22nd, our full recount numbers provided to the Secretary of State's office. Our investigation continues as to the discrepancies. And then on Thursday, December 29th, there's a court hearing. It starts a little bit late, scheduled for 10. There were some issues about whether people were going to be able to appear telephonically, whether they're going to be able to remote in, whether there's going to be a virtual option. It ends up starting, I believe, maybe 20 minutes late. It was a very short meeting. It was fairly nondescript. It was perfunctory is how I would really describe it, at which the court ultimately accepts the canvass, declares the two winners, and concludes the case in its entirety. At that point, the court order prohibiting us discussing the issues was no longer valid. The county quickly met. I know county manager was on the phone with us. I know Ms. Roll, myself, and we very quickly gathered together information that subsequently was published within about 2 hours of that court hearing concluding with Ms. Roll's detailed analysis of the mistakes that occurred. That information, I believe, is still available on the Elections Department webpage. I know Ms. Roll's going to talk about that here shortly, but all that information, again, within a couple hours was there. It was not flattering to Pinal County. I'm not going to make any two bones about it. I told you on the 21st that we were 99.99% right. We weren't. We were 99.7% right. 99.7%, while good, is not good enough. I think our elections department, everybody in this county, I think this board would agree, and we are working diligently to figure out how we can make sure that it's 99.9999%, not 99.7%. Some of the things that we have identified as a gap, if you will, we did a very good job of having a list of all of our milestones. On this date, this needs to be done. On this date, this needs to be done. And Supervisor McClure did a very good job of kind of explaining this to a group that I was with. We had these milestones that needed to occur, but what we didn't have is the procedures to address those milestones. And what had happened is we don't have an internal elections procedural manual. There is not a consistent ability for somebody to pick up a book, to look at it, go through and say, okay, when this happens, this is how we do it. This is the next step. Did we do this? Check off. Because there were some mistakes that were made. There were errors that could have been caught before the recount if we had had a checklist in place. Problem is, we had a new team that came in. We had almost entirely new elections director. We had lost a lot of our institutional knowledge. In order to ensure that we don't ever lose institutional knowledge again, the generation of a procedural internal procedural manual is, I think, absolutely vital and something that we are actively working on. I do have one bit of somewhat, I think, good news that I would like to share with the board. It's going to sound bad at first, so bear with me, but Mr. Hamada has filed a motion to reconsider. It's about 645 pages long in his election suit that was declined, or that was dismissed. And in it, he is actually somewhat complimentary to Pinal County. Now, obviously, they acknowledge that we screwed up. We made mistakes. But I'm going to read a couple select parts. It's actually on page 12. So this is, again, I'm reading this verbatim from the motion that was filed by Mr. Hamada's attorney. Quote, indeed, Pinal County set the best practice for identifying and fully analyzing potential discrepancies. When confronted with questions about the total number of votes and possible variance, Pinal County, quote, decided to open up the locked precinct 01 ballot box, end quote. Upon examination, it appeared to contain more ballot cards than tabulated on election day, and a hand count revealed 600 ballot counts. Upon completing this process, whereby officials physically counted the number of ballots contained in the precinct, Pinal County appears to have caught and resolved a major discrepancy. It goes down a little bit further. There's one portion where the county, talking about Pinal County, the county cracked open the box, physically counted ballots to confirm an error occurred, and then corrected the discrepancy with admirable candor. What I can tell you is we made mistakes. There's no two ways about it. Fortunately, it did not result in anybody's election being changed. But what I can tell you is at the end of the day, we got the numbers right. It took us a second try and a third try, quite frankly, with the day of ballots. We have very thoroughly examined why this happened, and we're taking every step we can to ensure that it does not happen again. But at the end of the day, the one thing that you should be proud of is our election department didn't shy away from this. We didn't hide, we didn't lie, we didn't manipulate, we didn't pencil whip anything. We owned up to our mistakes. We found out why they were there. We reported them to you with candor, and we're here today to answer any questions that you have. And with that, that concludes my report. Again, I would like Ms. Roll to have an opportunity to come up. Yes, I think that's all I have, unless there's further questions, but I would like Ms. Roll to come up and kind of explain what her investigation uncovered.
Just stand by, maybe we will, but
Absolutely.
Let's hear from Ms. Roll.
Thanks. So, how about if I just ask if you have any questions and I'll try to answer them? Or would you like me to go through the memorandum piece by piece, how the investigation unfolded? Your choice.
I don't see any questions, so Mr. Kavanaugh does.
So, at some point, did ENS&S come in and install new software or update software?
No. How about if we go through the memo and
Well,
see?
no, let me ask my questions.
Okay.
So, you're telling me they did not update or in any way the software. Do you recall talking about the software update and the settings were reset or something like that? The defaults were reset?
So let's talk about that piece of how the tabulating machines are, how they are set up for tabulating an election. So what happens is you create an election, and ES&S creates the election, and that tells the machine what races are on the ballot, who's running, and what propositions. So that's programming the election. It's not an update to the software. It is creating the election. That election is loaded onto each machine after they are first qualified. One of the things that we did not realize was when we went through the recount, you programmed a recount election for the same buckets that you had for the general election: early ballot, election day ballots, and provisional ballots. So you have a new stick, that's the recount program. And so that program only counted the statewide races. It only programmed for those two races to be counted on any ballots that were run through the machine. When you qualify the machine and then load in the recount election, what we were unaware of was that the sort settings that had been set on those machines for all of the general election count were reset to their default mode. So when we started counting Election Day votes, so I got to take you back. When we loaded Election Day for the general, after we had early voting loaded on the tabulators, the default settings were, the sort settings were set to default. And so on Election Day, when they were counting polling place ballots, those were not being sorted or outstacked for unclear marks. The default setting is unreadable and invalid ballots. Those are the only two that are hardwired. You cannot move those to different processing bins. So on Election Day, there were a number of races being counted. So if you had an unclear mark on the race that we were recounting, it processed that ballot. It did not outstack it for an unreadable or an unclear mark for adjudication. When we loaded the recount on, we changed our sort settings. We set our sort settings because we had ES&S there with the recount sticks. When they loaded it on, they said, what do you want your sort settings at? We set our sort settings as we had it set for early ballot, early voting. And so on the recount, it was outstacking those unclear marks, which are the check marks and the X's. That's where we came up with part of our discrepancy.
Okay. And did you have just one phone call with Corey Lorick, the group call, or were there other calls?
I think Corey was calling in during the recount, probably once or twice. You know, I think beyond the group call on the 7th, then I think she probably checked in with us again as we got closer and through the recount to see where we were,
Okay.
what our status was.
Did she give you advice when you told her errors or commentary when you noticed the errors?
No.
She didn't tell you not to worry about it?
Overall, the only one that I asked her about was when we started the recount on the Election Day ballots, and we were getting ballots that were coming out that I thought should have already been outstacked during the count during the general election. So why are these ballots coming out now on a recount for an unclear mark? Those should have come out on election night when they were counting them. So, you know, these...
And did she say not to worry about it?
She did.
And just to back up a second, you became elections director on, what was it, the December, I didn't recall the date, was it the 20th?
I believe it was on the 5th.
And you were an employee of the county attorney's office until that time.
Correct.
And machine number 2, that was not used during the recount, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was because it was double feeding and some other problems with that machine. You realized there was a problem.
We did not know what was leading to the discrepancy that we were seeing in the precincts that we initially investigated.
Okay.
And so I made 2 decisions. One was to have staff do the recount, to handle the ballots, rather than bring back the board that had counted election night ballots. And I only had enough staff to efficiently and effectively use 2 machines. And since I wasn't sure where our issue was, I did not use 2 for the recount.
Okay, and Scott and Gabe were the people from 2 of the names from ES&S who came to help, is that right?
No.
What were they were?
ES&S on election night had a fellow by the name of Mark with us. And then for the LNA on the 6th with the SOS on December 6th, that was Damon Hampton.
Okay. Then can you recall the first names of the persons from, were 2 people from S&S or just 1?
The only other...
Regular guy that didn't show up or was doing something else, and then you had the...
Damon Hampton is our account, our account manager. And so usually we have Damon. Damon was employed with the elections department. I think he left in 2016, and he went to ES&S.
Okay.
So Damon usually is with us or is with the Elections Department on election night, when we're actively using their equipment and their stuff. I mean, he's kind of an advisor. So he was in Indiana. We had Mark.
Okay.
He wasn't with us during election night.
Okay, we touched on poll pads. Voter registration and names, that's not part of the Elections Department. That's part of the Recorder's Office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so the names get loaded up to the poll pads by the Recorder's Office?
No.
Oh, can you explain that?
Mr. Chair, if I might, you're using names that I don't know. For instance, is it Corey Lork? Who is she?
She was the state elections director.
Okay, there's probably a lot of people in the audience or even our constituents that don't even know some of these names of people we're talking about. And it would be nice to know who they are and what departments they represent in the discussion here. So,
Forgive
thank
me,
you.
I
appreciate that.
I thought we had
I don't remember
broader
everything.
knowledge, so my apologies.
Well, it's that senior age that I have, and so I don't remember everything, so I apologize.
No problem. So the Recorder's Office is, Dana Lewis is the recorder, right?
Correct.
And so we were just talking about names loading up into the poll pads, and names and election data, that's the bailiwick of the Recorder's Office. But the poll pads, who loads the poll pads, and tell us about how that happened?
So the poll pads came from a company called No Inc., and they are affiliated with another company called Avid. And Avid is the statewide voter database that the Secretary of State maintains. So they keep all of the voters and their registration information, and a lot of it comes from the Department of Motor Vehicles. They keep all of that in a database. What happens is that the poll pads, a human being takes the poll pads, 250 of them, and goes in and creates a download from Avid into the poll pads, and that's done by an employee from elections, not from the Recorder's Office. And so in our case, there's and I think all poll pads are probably the same. In our case, apparently there was a box that needed to be marked that would download the driver's license information into the poll pad. We spent 3 days downloading voters into poll pads because we have a narrow band of internet, and if you try to do more than 5 poll pads at a time, they crash. It goes too slow. So we couldn't hook up all 250 and download. In any event, over the course of 3 days, we download the information from Avid into the poll pads. We did not download the driver's license information. And the poll pad relies on the driver's license. It has a scanner. You come up with your driver's license, you put it in, it takes a shot of it, and says you are a voter. It spits out a little receipt that you can then take to the judge's table and get a ballot.
And just for clarification, you and I have kind of discussed all this, and Ms. Rowe, you understand these questions we know the answers to. This exchange is for the benefit of the public. And so just so nothing nefarious happened in the Elections Department, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
And so
I found absolutely no evidence.
But there were issues with the canvas in your report, and reporters have called, and I refer them to your report, that you mentioned the data, the count. It sounded like it was premature. We should have done some auditing of the canvas before it was brought to the board. When did you start noticing those issues?
So Mr. Volkmer referred to a voter who contacted our office and said, why didn't my license scan at the polling place? On the 15th of November is when I responded back to him and said, this is what I'm finding out. I talked to the polling inspector. I've talked to No Inc. This is kind of what they're saying. We're still investigating. When I looked at that precinct, after the canvass was done, the precinct this voter came from, pulling out their physical data, looking at it, it was like, boof. There were more than just this one fellow whose driver's license didn't scan. There are probably close to 20 individuals who voted in that precinct. So there was a discrepancy between the number of poll pad check-ins because these folks weren't checked in, and the number of ballots that were cast in that precinct. That began part of the question of how can I rely on these poll pad numbers? What is the real issue? And then when you laid them out against the canvas numbers, it became clear. And I started with precinct 1 and talked to that precinct, that polling place inspector, and she described her process. I got out all of their poll pad receipts. I made sure that they didn't have any duplicates, that there was no canceled check-ins or something else that occurred, because the discrepancy was 210 votes cast, and we had 300 ballots that had been, or 300 plus ballots that had been handed, and 300 ballots had been handed out, plus we had poll pad check-ins of 300. So that was,
Okay, and then in the third paragraph of your recount discrepancy report, you said that workers failed to take additional steps to make sure provisional ballots were properly segregated. Have you found any documentation or evidence that the election workers were trained to take additional steps to make sure the ballots were properly segregated?
the ballots that we did not properly segregate were the write-ins from the provisionals. So there were, I believe, 24 write-in ballots. When we counted the provisionals on the 17th of November, those write-ins, those are outstacked, they're processed, but because they have a write-in, they go to the second bin, the second tray, and those are pulled out and given to a write-in board so you can record if there are any valid write-ins. When that process was done, those were unfortunately put into a box with the early ballot write-ins, because we had 4 boxes of early ballot write-ins write-ins from early ballots. So they weren't kept in the box with the provisionals or banded and labeled.
I'm confident you're going to fix that.
I am.
I'm very happy
Yes.
you're there.
Thank you.
And on page 2 of your report, you notice that in your report it says the canvass was filed prior to taking an adequate opportunity to investigate anomalies. And they were known these anomalies were known inside the elections department prior to the canvass. Who made the decision to sort of withhold this information from the Board of Supervisors prior to the canvass? Was there a decision-making process that you were aware of?
I had no part in any decision-making process for doing the canvass or when the canvass was brought to the board. So I believe that obviously on the 15th of November and the 16th, I'm corresponding with the voter who had issues with the poll pads, and we are beginning to see issues, and certainly Ms. Ross was made aware of those issues.
Okay, and then there was an attorney working within the elections department. I just lost my place here. His name was there a Scott Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, was that an employee of the elections department, or is that a county attorney?
He was on assignment from the county attorney's office.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate the fact that you're working hard to fix the errors and go through process, and I think next time we'll have a solid election. When we talk about errors, there was machine errors, human errors, and process errors. In your experience, have you identified other management errors that would have helped to make this election go smoother?
You know, again, I believe that the canvass was done prematurely. I think we had enough to have raised raised a few questions, and we should have taken more steps before we canvassed. We certainly had time. On the 17th, as Mr. Volkmer told you of November, that was it was just within a half hour or so after completing the count of the provisional ballots, which were only 600, by the way, that we were filing. Virginia was pulling the canvas off of the election software and sending it to the Board of Supervisors. So there was no opportunity was taken to really look at any of those numbers carefully. The last early ballots were counted on the 16th.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you, and thank you for answering the questions completely and digging into this, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. And so you know, I believe the most important thing that we can do and what is top priority for me is building that procedure manual. We must have a procedure to each of these processes, starting from the very beginning, and people need to understand exactly how to do it, which boxes to check, what are the machines doing. We have to have a full understanding of everything that we work with, and that's what we will strive for. Any other questions?
No. Is that everything you wanted to present?
I believe so.
Okay. Ken? Okay. So I want to make a short statement, and of course I can't speak for everyone up here, but yes, it was 99.9% accuracy, but every vote got counted, and we continue to strive for that, and we will continue to be transparent. I wish the other counties would as well. It seems like they go fighting every step of the way. Just get it all out there, and it'll go away, is the way I look at it. And we do get contact. I have over 1,000 emails from some, I don't know where they're coming from, asking for a recount in Maricopa County. We're not Maricopa County. We can't do anything about that. I don't know why we're included on that. But we do appreciate the transparency, and I think as long as we do that, we will, it'll be looked like, you know, how it should be. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, call to the public. We all know how that works.
Just grab my stuff.
Remember, you have red and green lights there. When it gets to be a red light, it's time to go. So we're going to have the names, and we need basically your address of where you're from. Barry McCain.
Happy New Year's, everyone. My name is Barry McCain. But good morning, Chairman Surdy, Board of Supervisors, staff, and friends. My name is Barry McCain from Maricopa. I'm honored to be here and thankful that we've gotten through this Christmas holidays. It costs a lot of lives. President Truman, if we don't have empathy for others, what good are we? President Truman once said, America was built on courage, imagination, unbreakable determination to do the job at hand. We've had in the past civil leaders special because they were determined to push those in higher office to listen to uncomfortable truth, and they've cared about those that are overlooked or sometimes written off. Yet their efforts and outcome were worth the sacrifice because democracy is worth fighting for and worth saving. This upcoming Arizona legislative session will be each tasked to sacrifice for the whole in order to give Americans and Arizonans a better quality of life. We must hold those in higher office accountable for the Arizona economy. We must produce action because, as it turns out, action is the antidote for despair. It's been said that if your vote is not heard, if your voice is not heard or counted, if your community is not represented, then your will, at minimum, is less likely to realize the opportunities that this country make possible. I wish to say the true promise to Arizona was not perfection, but constant improvement. This must be our goal in the upcoming Arizona legislative session because we must never accept comedy, spelled C-O-M-I-T-Y, and comfort over confrontation of fairness.
Vicki McLaughlin.
No, I do not need to speak today. I think my questions were covered.
Thank you. Pete Sabin.
Good morning, Chairman Surdy and Supervisors. Pete Sabin, unincorporated Marana. A lot of my questions, I think, were answered as well. I still have a couple. I understand and appreciate the position you guys are in, so I sympathize. It's not easy, and I do appreciate your willingness to be up here and be open and talk about the election. As Chairman Surdy said, I wish the other counties were as transparent and forthcoming about stuff. I guess my first question is with regard to the gag order, if you want to call it that, not to discuss the election and the recount. I don't believe that would include communication with Judge Jansen in Mojave County or with Judge Thomason in Maricopa with regard to Abe Hamadeh's lawsuits. That could have been relayed back channel. There are discrepancies. We're looking into them. Maybe that lawsuit wouldn't have been dismissed out of hand, which, like it or not, affects us here in in Pinal because of, the outcome of the election. The other question, I guess, is, and it's really even a statement, I guess, is we need to direct resources to the elections department, to the recorder's office, to make sure that things like this don't happen again. The primary had problems, and now the generals had problems. A T1 line, adequate internet speed, not very expensive. $100, $150 a month. So this 5 license upload at a time thing would go away. So I believe we need to direct adequate resources to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And I think there needs to be a little bit more transparency about early ballots versus day of versus provisional and where all the errors are. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion, but if in-person voting was only 35,000-ish, then 507 votes short is actually 1.45%, not 0.3%. So that's a huge error. These machines are, I called the elections department and I was unable to get a records request in time to have the information for this meeting, but most of those election machines, tabulation machines, are like 0.01% accurate. So to have even 0.3% or 1.45 is just unacceptable. We wouldn't tolerate this with our money in banks if it was being counted with that level of accuracy, and we shouldn't allow that with our vote, which arguably is much more important to a republic, not a democracy. Democracy is mob rule. This is a republic, and I think we need to get this right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I give direction to our staff? There's some questions and things that he had in the beginning, one of his first discussion, or his first question, if you could address that. And then maybe along that line, we have I know we're working on trying to improve our systems and everything else, but make that part of one of our work sessions as we have some open discussions on what we're going to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
John Orton.
John Orton. I live in the unincorporated area of Eloy. As our county attorney stated, there were problems. My question to you is, your $25,000 bonus to Virginia Ross was based upon no problems, so I hope you direct the county attorney to do a clawback on that $25,000 that you paid for an error-free election. Thank you.
Okay. Mary Rodriguez.
Good morning, Mary Rodriguez from Casa Grande. Just as a citizen sitting here watching this, it looks like such a scramble. Thank you for answering a lot of questions, but there's so many things that are just kind of glossed over. One, recount. Is that totally a machine recount? Or did that include actually opening the boxes and counting the paper? That was not made clear. A machine recount alone is not enough in this case. The boxes need to be opened and the paper needs to be looked at. And when there's 2% recount required by statute, or that's every election, that's what gets done, a 2%.
Pinal County has 109 to 112 precincts. So in this particular Abe Hamadeh's recount and investigation, they found 394 votes. Was that just out of this 2%? That needs to be expanded. They found so much discrepancy to just look at 2 precincts, which is 2% of the 112. That's not enough. It needs to be expanded. And it does not instill confidence in the citizenry when that's what we're looking at here. And there's all kinds of numbers flying around. And, you know, when you say that we will have another, when Supervisor Kavanaugh said we will have a better election next time, well, now we have problems with 2018. We had huge problems with the primary. And now we have this. What makes us feel like we will have a better election next time? I do not have confidence. This isn't done. This can't be done with just 2% being looked at and almost 400 votes being found. You don't fail to mention that only 24 provisional ballots were found in error. People scramble over 24. This is 394 ballots, including the ones that went for the opponent, which was another 115 or so. So, not enough. You see how technical it gets when Elections Director Roll comes up and explains how complicated this is. It's complicated. It's not an easy thing, especially when you involve machines. It certainly makes paper ballots so much more logical if you had to count paper ballots at each precinct.
There's your red light.
And come up with a total, you'd have to add up 112 numbers. Compare that to the description that Elections Director Roll was giving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Allie Miller.
Good morning. My name is Allie Miller. I live in Pima County. I was a former supervisor in Pima County for 8 years. And listening this morning, it's even more scary than I originally thought. It sounds like there were all kinds of different errors than what I have been reading about. You had a disastrous primary election, and then you fired the elections director and hired your former Pinal County recorder for $175,000 plus $25,000. I used to rail about Chuck Huckleberry in Pima County, $400,000 plus his benefits. This is annualized to $600,000. And I don't know how anybody justifies that. I don't know what you're paying your elections director now. But that is a lot of money, and I totally agree with the lady that said you should claw back that $25,000 because this was not, by any account I heard here this morning, a smooth election. And from what I have seen in the news media, in the Arizona Daily and Independent, I saw a report that the officials and this gentleman here, Supervisor Kavanaugh, asked the question, and I really appreciate your questions because it clarifies a lot. I wish a lot of you had a lot more questions. That these problems were known about prior to certification, and then the elections director role just confirmed that. And actually, you certified a week ahead of the deadline, so you had plenty of time. And I assume you all were notified. If you weren't, I do hope some heads are rolling. You should have been notified. And the fact that if any of you knew about this and you certified an election, that was a certification of a fraudulent election. Those numbers were not correct, and if you knew they weren't correct and you certified, that is called fraud. I did not certify. I voted no on the certification in 2020 in Pima County because of the issue with fully American citizens being given federal-only ballots. I I just have a few questions. Does anyone think certifying incorrect numbers is okay? Did your attorney, why didn't your attorney, who is an officer of the court, notify the courts of these discrepancies? I know it is the duty of the Secretary of State to report that. She didn't. And I think everyone was watching that. Did anyone certifying the elections? Abe Hamadeh was in court. We knew this was a big issue. And when you say it's not a big issue, he's only off by 280 votes. I think this lady suggested a hand recount of the whole county. I think that is in order, given all of the issues identified here this morning. Thank you very much.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak that did not hand in a form? All right, we will move on to...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I believe the rules allow us to reopen an issue. I wonder if we could reopen the elections issue for 5 minutes. And would that require a motion? It was a...
What do you mean, the election issue?
Well, the elections, the first item. Item 1. Just the elections discussion.
And you think it's appropriate to do it now rather than at a...
Yes, sir.
I had my ringer off. I really did. There it is. I don't see any. I guess so. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, we will go back to item 1 rather than do it at another time.
Thank you. And may I make comment, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
So, Mr. Goodman asked about the former discussion, and my question was on verbatim, on December 7th, Kent Volkmer informed the board that there is a prohibition regarding revealing the count and concerning recount, and we're not to disclose the vote total that's been determined. And I want to make it clear with the county attorney's office, the judge's order does not prohibit us from talking about problems inside the election, other issues or processes. Is that correct? And Mr. Keller's response was correct. So forgive me if I mischaracterized that. That was the question and that was the answer. So it was my question and his answer was to clarify that. There's another issue that I'm concerned about, and that is that we more fully explain, Mr. Chairman, to the public, perhaps in writing, in summary, how the vote occurred, how many votes were cast, how they were counted, machine count, so they have it in writing and very clear. So those are just a couple things I wanted to state, and I appreciate you opening the item up.
Anyone else? Okay, then we will move on to the county manager's report.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We do have a video of our Pinal Regional Park that's opening. We have a ribbon cutting here on January 11th. But I'd also like to mention that we were able to obtain a federal grant for about $14 million to build. For those that are familiar, this Peralta Regional Park is up against the Superstition Mountain, just on the north side of Peralta Canyon. And there's an elementary school there that you'd pass up, and then you go on to a graded dirt road. So we were able to obtain a federal grant to pave that road all the way to our regional park, and then beyond that, all the way to the federal trailhead. So for those that are familiar, the federal trailheads are very popular, very beautiful back there. We maintain and own a trailhead, Lost Gold Mine Trail, so east side of that trail. And then there's a Wave Cave Trail as well that is pretty popular that people go out to. So paving this road is going to be a great thing for a lot of the people that like to go out there and enjoy that recreation. And design should be done in 23, as well as the acquisition from state land for the right-of-way. And then we'll be starting construction probably late 24 on that road. I don't know, Tasha, if you can cue up that video for us.
And then what time is the ribbon cutting in the morning? I've been asked that, and I don't know.
I have to look back. I think it's 10 o'clock, but let me confirm. While the video's going, I'll confirm that, and I'll give you the time.
All right,
and also, just for the public, that this is the first park of this type for us as a county, and one of the things we like to do is when we open, we get the experience of the citizens and the users. We'd like to get feedback from them, so please, we use that feedback, whether it's changing our fee structure, whether we end up offering something like a seasonal fee or an annual. We don't have that yet, but we're waiting to see what the feedback and the turnout is from the people that want to come use and enjoy this park.
So excited we're finally out here at Peralta Regional Park, and we're going to do this little video to give some information of what is out here exactly. 500 acres. There are 18 ramadas, 2 of which are these big community ramadas, and they're reservable. There's barbecues here. There's 31 campsites, and it's 500 acres. People don't realize how big this is. There's meandering roads through it all, and it's going to take more than one trip to come out here and enjoy it all. You can do nature walks, stargazing. There's a special section just for that. So we're really excited about it, and it's all in the shadows of the majestic Superstition Mountains. On a personal note, I'm so privileged to be the supervisor for District 5. We've got the Goldfield Ghost Town, we've got the Arboretum, we've got Lost Dutchman State Park, we've got the Renaissance Festival, Country Thunder, and now Peralta Regional Park, and that's all in District 5. So, excuse me, but I'm a little bit proud of that. I don't want to make the other parts of the county jealous, but come out here and enjoy Pinal County. This is the North Pinal County, and we're so proud of it. And remember, the ribbon cutting is January 11th. Everyone's looking forward to that, and the public can then come out and enjoy. You can actually camp that night at January 11th, so really looking forward to it. All of it right here at the base of the Superstition Mountains.
Yep, 10 o'clock, Chairman. Is the ribbon cutting.
And Kevin Johnson does an awesome job on all of the videos that he does. Yeah. What's that?
We're doing credits now?
Yeah.
Who directed?
Is that it?
That is, thank you.
All right, thank you. Purchasing Division report. Tiara.
User error. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the board. I'm Tiara Peterson, Purchasing Manager, Pinal County, and this is your purchasing report for January 4th, 2023. First, the board is requested to approve the following contract awards. RFP 203026 for Public Defense Services Office Attorney Services. We recommend that the law offices of Adam Jones be awarded a contract beginning January 4th, 2023 to run concurrent with the current contract term that expires on June 30th, 2023. This contract is used by the Public Defense Services Office. ROQ 233424, Architect for New Elections Building. We recommend Swan Architects, Inc. be awarded a contract, and this contract will be used by the Facilities Department. And then finally, the board is requested to approve the following cooperative purchases. Requisition 166262 with Arcadis US, Inc. in the amount of $413,411.92 for construction management services for the elections and early voting building. This will be used by the Facilities Department. PO number 248150 with Danson Construction LLC in the amount of $1,018,546 for the Public Health Vector Lab Addition project, also used by the Facilities Department. And PO 248793 with DocuLinks Operations LLC in the amount of $132,678 for document preparation used by the Clerk of the Superior Court. And that concludes your Purchasing Division report for January 4th, 2023.
Does anyone have any questions? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the Purchasing Division report as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Consent agenda items all items indicated by an asterisk will be a single vote unless someone wants to pull anything. Would anyone like to pull anything from this agenda? If not, I will ask for a motion on the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, oh, forgive me. No, nothing pulled.
I move we approve the consent items as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's unanimous as well. And now is the time where I recess this meeting and we go into flood control. And does anyone have any questions on the flood control agenda? And I will ask for a motion on that consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the flood control agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes. We'll recess that and go to the library board. And the same way, is there any questions on the library district? If not, I'll ask for a motion on that agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the consent items for the library district as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. We'll then go into the health department. Does anyone have any questions on that agenda? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the health department consent, or the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that one's unanimous as well. Item number 9. Okay, I will go back into session of the board meeting. And we will have Chris Keller will step out. Andrew McGuire will take over these hearings. And this is one of those cases where the board is acting as a quasi-judicial board. Please proceed.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board, County Manager. My name is Craig Cameron. I'm the Deputy